Live is starting. Okay, now we're live.
Hooray!
Hello. Hello, world. Welcome back. Another episode of Work Better Weekly. In case you are unfamiliar, Work Better Weekly is our weekly discussion of all things work and HR, led by myself, Whitney and Cleave, and my sister Caley, who is Caley Van Cleave, also a co-founder. I guess we are co-founders together of Iridium Helps. And what is Iridium Helps? We are basically seasoned vets when it comes to doing recruiting and HR consulting over the last 15 years or so. And now we are here providing help to individuals and organizations through courses and workshops and just generally sharing our knowledge. Caley, kind of clunky. Did I miss anything?
I mean, big thing here is we created Iridium Helps so that we could take the 15 years of experience that we've had helping build and grow organizations and move through kind of all of the functions on the people components of an organization to individuals so that way they can actually leverage the know-how, the tips, the tricks, and everything that we've learned in the last kind of 15 plus years of doing this out in the industry. So that way they could maneuver through their career more effectively with more confidence and have the ability to leverage our team as backup support for them when they get into those spots like career changes and offers, negotiations, all kinds of stuff like that. So,
yeah, great.
yeah.
So the premise for Work Better Weekly is that basically we take some of the topics that we have worked on with our clients in the past week and we discuss them and share our thoughts and feelings and kind of unpack them a little bit further. So for this week, we're going to be talking about things that came up last week, including PTO and onboarding as the kind of hot topics. So let's get into it. I'm calling it PTO woes, but it doesn't need to be woes. It just sometimes seems like it mainly is. Caley, you were working with a client last week on a PTO program, and it brought up the question of what is a PTO philosophy, kind of why does it matter? Why don't you take us through a little bit on kind of what you saw, and then we'll analyze a little bit.
Yeah. So this past week, one of the big topics that we were discussing and working through with one of our clients was tied to PTO. So PTO is paid time off. In case you don't understand the acronym, because I know that the world is filled with all these lovely acronyms nobody can keep track of. So paid time off is a big thing that has shifted over the course of the last, kind of 10 years from a state to state basis. And also an approach from a organizational philosophy standpoint on how companies and individuals, kind of think about time away from the office. And that can be either paid or unpaid. And so really what we are talking about when we say a PTO philosophy is each organization ultimately has its kind of approach, for lack of better ways to say it, towards PTO that they, kind of institute on a regular basis. And as an individual, it's really important to, especially if you're shopping for jobs or looking at new opportunities, for you to really kind of hone in and understand what the, PTO philosophy is of an organization. And then flipping the script on like an organizational level, one of the big caveats of having, or the reasons and motivators for having the PTO policy or philosophy is so that you and the teams, so every individual in the team can actually understand how best to approach work and life, because let's be honest, work and life kind of commingle a lot of times. And so the PTO philosophies and approaches can either help make that work well, or it can actually create quite a bit of disadvantage and lead to higher um, higher levels of people exiting an organization or a team over time. So that's what we're talking about when we say PTO philosophies. Now there's some cool ones, some things that we've really enjoyed, that we like the trends on, that we've seen be successful. And there are, like Whitney was saying, there are PTO woes. Like we've seen companies just, oh man, just like really bite the dust on this stuff. So it really does matter.
Yeah, and I think fundamentally, when we talk about the PTO philosophy kind of piece, it plays heavily into like a company's organization, kind of their culture, right? So there are folks that we've worked with over the years that are very much more traditional and, as one might call them, old school in their approach to work, which is that, you know, basically you're getting paid a wage, that's good enough. And, if you want time off, then great, take it unpaid. That is like a very old school philosophy. Then we also have worked with organizations that are very much culturally geared towards creating an environment where people feel like they are supported from a like work-life balance, or they really want to encourage people to take time away from the office with the idea that it actually makes them more productive and a better employee when they are in the office if they've taken that vacation. So those are kind of two very different philosophies, as it were. And you're also seeing, as Kaylee mentioned, a new philosophy that has been very popular in the last, 5 years or so, is the unlimited PTO
Yeah, what do you
philosophy.
think about the unlimited PTO, Winnie?
Well, I think there's some things to consider. So let's actually kind of skip into the next question a little bit, which is, what factors should a policy take into account? For the purpose of this question, we are thinking from the organizational level. So we've got our HR hats on right now, thinking about that. For me personally, I think the things that should be taken into an account um, really have to do with, one, a company understanding what the actual need is in terms of an individual's time in order to produce. And then I think another huge thing is whether or not they actually support their philosophy. So, like, do they practice what they preach? Because I think a lot of times um, they're out of alignment.
Yeah.
Kaylee, what's your take on it? What factors should companies be taking into consideration when they're thinking about things like unlimited PTO?
I think you have to take into consideration who's on your team, like honestly, because who's on your team and how they work really should be the driving factors tied to your development of your PTO. So if I have a team that is mainly, women that, work remote and have family life responsibilities that are, kind of really important for us to maintain as an organization and as part of our culture, then I might look at an unlimited PTO policy that has flexibility on schedule as being freaking awesome, like an amazing arrangement. If I have a different population that, really likes consistency and maybe needs to be in office because, either they're working in a lab environment or they have physical things to produce, like they're production tech or something along those lines, then that's a different environment entirely, right? When I don't have someone in there, the whole production line or the whole lab might not work, and our kind of our overall kind of functional elements as an organization might be hampered if that is not balanced between the schedules of the organization and the schedules of the individuals. So I think you have to look at who the heck do you have on your team and how do they actually like to work? I mean, when was the last time that you had, you heard of managers or ownership asking those questions, saying like, who the hell's on our team and how do they actually like to work before they consider developing a paid time off policy?
Yeah, it's interesting that this comes up. I was chatting with a non-client individual last week about PTO changes to the PTO policy and the work from home policy at his organization. And
Mhm.
one of the things that came to light, and this can be a whole episode on its own, which is crafting policies without people and letting policies be the tail that wags the dog instead of the other way around, in the sense that you're exactly right. When you're starting to think about putting together new policies, and I think this applies to PTO and any policy for an organization, right? When you're starting to think about putting together new policies, the first question should always be like, where does this start with the people, right? How does this policy need to look from the employee standpoint, in the sense of, are we creating policy because of things that we're seeing from within our employees, or are we creating policies because we have an idea, or we're interpreting things, or we're doing it from a punitive standpoint, a
Mhm.
lot. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I think it does. I mean, if you think about it, like even as you're looking at new opportunities as an individual out there
Right,
and you're taking a look at these different organizations, you truly do need to understand what is the approach that the company has on paid time off. Because if your needs are that you have to be there to pick up children by 3 p.m. every single day, or I don't know, for us, in our family, it was often tied to, our parents' care. Like maybe there were certain
I
things
think
that
they call
needed
it elder care, caregiving.
elder care,
Yeah,
caregiving, right? And so there's
yeah,
a lot of us out there that are in caregiving capacities and
right,
they require flexibility. So I think sometimes we look at PTO policies as things that are kind of, you know, stuck in concrete.
right,
And oftentimes when you are out there negotiating for a new role, that's an area that you can negotiate terms on, right?
right.
And it's important if you need it to have those things negotiated early in the conversations with your future employer and make sure you get that ironed out and in writing so that you have some level of kind of boundary on it. And reverse that for this past week with the client, right? One of the things the client was trying to accomplish was they want to make sure that they have a PTO policy that works well for their team. So they rolled out a policy that they thought would perform well. Come to find out, 3 months in, it was not performing. It wasn't working, and instead of just waiting and staying in this, like, PTO policy that didn't quite fit the population, it behooves the team to, go back in and say, like, "Hey, what do we need to adjust? Do we need to adjust how you ask for paid time off? Do we need to adjust, the way we have it structured? Or is it an education-based thing? Like, does everybody not know how the new policy works yet? Because it has only been 3 months. So, it's those kinds of questions for companies. I think, talking to the actual employees and getting their insight is really valuable.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point here, which is, if you dialogue on the front end with your employees, you don't have to keep reissuing different policy changes. And so I think that is, you're hitting on that, which is having those conversations and getting that feedback from your employee population prior to developing the policy is huge. And this is something
Mhm.
that we see particularly with small businesses,
Yeah.
that it just feels like, I think a lot of times, like, oh, I just need to put something in place, or I just need to do HR, or like have these um, steady actions that are seemingly very casual decisions, but can have really substantial impacts, not only in, as Kaylee mentioned, like productivity and staffing needs, and just a bottom line number, on a lot of different fronts. So I think that's interesting. One other caveat or thing that I would like to mention too is, I think if I am a individual and I'm interviewing for a job, I not only want to ask on the front end about what the PTO policy is. A lot of times people say, oh, we get X amount of weeks, or it's in the job posting, right? Those are great
Mhm.
questions. But that doesn't tell you the reality of how their PTO use is actually being practiced. And so that's where I think it's a huge benefit for any job seeker or any candidate to actually ask the questions in the interview. How often do people take time off? Is it difficult to get a time off request? What does that look like? Um, is there flexibility in people using time off in increments? So sometimes people can use PTO for, like Kaylee mentioned, picking up kids, or scheduling missing rush hour, things like that, where you can use your PTO as a kind of like an hour in the scheduling process. Other companies require that you take a full 8 hours if you're going to take PTO. So those are the types of questions I would be asking on the front end when I'm thinking about joining a new company,
Mhm.
from that PTO standpoint.
And those are great. One of my favorites, because I think, the questions that you have are great to ask like a hiring manager. When you are interviewing with a peer, what will be a future peer for you, one of my favorite questions is, "Hey, tell me about your last vacation."
Yeah.
And it's a great way to hear how does the vacation policy work from an individual, and they're not going to give you just the corporate line, right? Instead, they're thinking that you're asking about a personal based question, right? Like, hey, how was that last vacation? Where did you go? Like, awesome. How far in advance did you have to request that off? Like, do you get to go places frequently? Like, is this like the third time that you've been like, I mean, as you can tell right now, I'm in an Airstream on my vacation, being like, hey, when was the last time you went mountain biking? Like on a vacation? Did you do that like 2 or 3 times last year or what? So you can make it more casual and end up with a lot of really nice data that comes out of that for you to see kind of how the people who are at the company are actually using their paid time off, right? So that's a nice one too.
Yeah, I like that one. And one other one I would throw in the mix too is if you're interviewing with a hiring manager that's been there for a while, asking them, what was your favorite vacation is a great thing. And then also, have there been any changes? Or if you're interviewing with HR, this is a great question. Have there been any changes to the PTO policy? Or when was the last time that the PTO policy was changed? And you can always soften that by saying, in my previous company, it changed frequently or didn't change infrequently. So it's a conversational point, but it
Mhm.
is a nice thing because, you would want to know ahead of time if somebody is changing their PTO policy every single year and you have
Yeah.
no concept of, what's changing from one year to the next.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would ask about the personal experiences and then the questions that you've got with for sure and your interview process. So, question I've got for you, next one is what kind of from a policy standpoint, maybe let's take it from the individual's perspective, what works well and what doesn't on PTO from like an individual?
Yeah, so I think, having worked in a variety of different environments, man, sometimes it's just so complicated. So I think,
It's true.
as an individual employee, the things that matter most, in terms of PTO use and application and policy is, one is consistency. I want to know that when I am, you know, planning my year and thinking about, or even thinking about taking this new job, right? Is there consistency in the PTO, or is it going to be something that's changing? So things to look for on that front are, we're experimenting with policy. We're trying this new thing, like just making sure that you're paying attention to those types of little, kind of nuanced answers. And then I think honestly, the level of responsibility. So does the organization that you're thinking about joining or that you're in, do they trust their employees to have a level of accountability when they are on PTO? And by that I mean, are you actually able to step away from your work? Are there systems in place that make it so you are covered when you are out of the office? Whether that's another individual or you're having those conversations on the front end, just generally what that looks like. Because I think that, especially in this day and age, we are all too familiar as employees of the situation where we take time off and we are on vacation and we are checking our emails and we are being called. You see this a lot in, construction or things that are very timely. So that's not to say that those are necessarily all bad things. It's just you want to make sure that there is a very strong level and understanding of what the accountability looks like when somebody's out on vacation.
Yeah, I would agree. I think what works well is clarity, like you had
Clarity.
mentioned. Yeah, clarity.
Yeah.
Like, hey, how do I need to use this policy? How does it? Hey, how do I get to step away from work? Do I
Right.
need to make sure that I have my work covered by somebody else? Do I need to make sure that I give you guys enough heads up? Things along those lines. Sometimes it might not be as feasible for you to have a complete cutoff and go to Nepal for a month, but those are things that you should find out earlier in the process, or at least understand how to work within the paradigm that you find yourself in with this new employer or with your current employer. Um, Things that I think don't work well. So, things that truly suck are, companies where, you put a time in request or request for time off in with your manager and it gets denied consistently. From that point in time forward, it's really hard to stay motivated at the organization and in the role if there are consistent rejections, right, to your paid time off requests. It's one of the biggest factors for people to exit a role in the future, and it is really, really problematic from a retention and cultural standpoint for the team. So that's a thing that definitely does not work well. It's an okay in a certain time with a certain crisis, but if that's a consistent behavior from leadership, that can be super problematic for an organization.
Yeah. And so, Kaylee, what are some kind of delving into that question a little bit further? You know, in your experience, what are some of the things that if I'm a hiring manager or if I'm a
Mhm.
manager in general, um, that makes sense in terms of denying a request versus what you've seen where maybe somebody's just denying everything?
Yeah, yeah. I think if you're going to deny a request, so say you're a manager and you have someone come to you with a request for paid time off, and if you're going to say no to that request, it needs to come quickly. So it needs to come in a timely fashion so that way people can pivot and make adjustments, right? It needs to also have an explanation with it, right? So, and it needs to have a solution. So, for example, if the answer is no, you cannot do a month in Nepal during an election year because that is our highest, our biggest, our biggest challenging year, right? Once every 4 years in a presidential election. Say you work in politics and this is your narrative right now. And you can't take a month off this year because it's an election year. We need all hands on deck. Um, However, I do think what we can do is we can squeeze in, a portion of what you're looking for, maybe between this date and this other date. And then maybe we tap back and you can take some time, we'll break it apart so that it's less cumbersome to the rest of the team to have you be out. That kind of response is A, done in a timely fashion, B, has a clear picture as to why it does not work for the organization itself. And then, the final part C is it actually gives them an alternative pathway forward. I think where people go wrong when they say no is they just flat out reject. They take too long to make the rejection. So they don't tell you this isn't going to work until 2 days before a vacation that you've had on the books or on the calendar for quite some time.
Right.
Or they don't work with you to try to adjust. It's just a pure rejection and it leaves all of the burden back onto the individual to try to figure out what to submit again to get approved. So that's isolating. That doesn't work for an employee, right? And so you as a manager, you definitely need to do timely, identify kind of the why behind the no, and then put the clarity behind a solution for them to move forward so that there's like a middle ground, right? On how they can take that time away. So that's what
Yeah.
I would say, Whit.
And there's a similar element from an employee standpoint as well. If I am an employee and I
Mhm.
am asking for time off, it's important that I understand that I'm asking about it as, and it's going to be weighed against the needs of the company and, a number of factors. So, there could be, and what I'm getting at is that it's a conversation, right? So if I'm an employee, I go to you, Caley, as my manager, and I say, hey, I need 5 days off because my grandmother's turning 100 and 2 years old. But it just so happens that that falls within a product launch window. Then the conversational aspect of that could be more along the lines of, yes, we totally understand. Is there a way we could, do a shorter duration on the trip? Is there a way that you could potentially get somebody to cover your, responsibilities for this product launch? And in those cases, I just think that it's really vital for both employees and managers to understand that it is a conversation. It can be a compromise because without that and without that clarity and timeliness that you're talking about, it really can lead to this really gnarly, yeah, everybody is back channeling everybody about the whole thing, and it can cause a lot of unnecessary heartache and disruption.
It can. Um, if you want success in asking for time off, you need to come prepared to your manager with a action plan that's going to be digestible for them if it is going to be a problematic time frame for you to be out. Like that it ensures your success, it ensures the success of the team itself, and it's going to get you closer to that yes for what you're looking for. So, yeah, all the responsibility unfortunately in that request is kind of on you if it's going to be in those like really strange like problematic time frames. So,
Yeah, and I think one thing that I see consistently with, women coaching clients around PTO is that we have this idea that shit can't get done without us. That we are absolutely, not able to step away. And that can be true in some cases for sure. But there's also a little bit of, I think, like head trash around that. And particularly around also setting boundaries, right? So, working with an individual who is a high level project manager on large construction projects. Well, when she asked for vacation a couple years back, initially the ask was, hey, can I take the time? They said, yes, of course. And then she proceeded to be on the phone and texting through her whole vacation. And she got very upset about it, rightly so. Well, the thing that was missing in that equation, exactly like you're saying, Caley, is the clarity and understanding the ask ahead of time. So after a little bit of discussion and coaching, when she went back last year to request a significant trip time off during their busy season, the stipulation was, I am requesting this time off. And when I say time off, here are the elements that I will not be engaging in. I will be checking my emails once per week. I will respond to anything that I deem is actually an emergency, right? And then here are the people who are going to be running interference and handling everything else while I'm gone. And they will escalate things to me when I leave. So that's a very different experience and engagement um, from the vacation standpoint. Yes, it's a little uncomfortable on the front end to go and have that type of a conversation, but that discomfort means that you get to actually enjoy your full vacation. And I think that's just such a great example of how that clarity conversation can work.
I like it because it actually gave everybody ground rules. You know, I think a lot of times
Yeah,
we launch into a paid time off, um, kind of request and then into the actual time itself without a playbook, right?
right.
And one of the big things that I love about some of the policies that we've worked on recently is actually embedding the playbook into the time off requests. So Then the employees know how to ask for the time off, right? The functionality, whether that be like systems, whatever. I think a lot of times HR or management teams only focus on the how to communicate when the person's out, right? And
Right.
how to categorize it and track it from a payroll financial perspective. Oh my God, we are missing out big time when we do this. What we're missing out on is we are not asking the employees and the team members to have the behaviors of expressing what are they when you go out, who's going to be taking point on what elements, right? So
Right.
a plan of action for the work to still continue forward in that person's absence. How those people can be communicated with. So the boundaries around it, right? So your example, Whitney, with your most recent, right? Having the boundaries on how frequently you're going to be checking emails. If you will be, you might not be in a place where that's even possible. And then how you're going to handle crisis if there is any kind of, kind of like fires that come up, right? During
Right.
that person's time away. And so without having that conversation kind of done on the front end or creating a PTO policy where those communications are part of the request process, we miss out and we leave people kind of in a lurch. We leave management in a lurch questioning like, hell, is this shit going to get done while so-and-so's out? Well, while Whitney's out on her epic vacation, I don't know. We didn't really talk about it. Or on the reverse side, it leaves Whitney, if you're out and about, being like, hey, is management sure? Or is anybody checking my emails? Are they sure that they're going to like keep things moving? I don't want it to be my fault that I come back and I have an inbox that is a dumpster fire and all these angry messages. So
Yeah.
build it into the policies, people. That's where the sweet spot is.
Well, that dovetails very nicely into this last question on the PTO front, which is what we would like to see change. And I know for me, it's twofold. The first one being I would like to see this culture of fear around PTO be dissipated. And I think that what you mentioned on building that clarity into the policies is a great way to do that. Because I can tell you just from what we do, right? There is so much anxiety and fear and worry around PTO. Am I taking it? Am I not taking it? Am I all the way out? Am I kind of the way out? And it just like lends this like huge cluster of, death
Yeah.
spiraling emotions around it. And so I think that's a huge one for me, Kaylee. I see you nodding your head. Is how do you feel about that?
Fucking clarity, man. That's how I feel about it. Like, I mean, I wish that we could see change on the level of like, why we have fear about PTO is because we're not clear on the expectations of how to take PTO, when to take PTO, what's going to happen when you're out, and getting everybody on the same page. It's honestly one of the biggest problems with fear is tied to the lack of communication and understand the behaviors around it, period, on both sides of the equation. And shame on us. Like to put it out there in such a disgruntled fashion that basically it leaves everybody fearful for taking the time off that then leads to burnout and all the other stuff simply because we didn't put the time in on the front end to make it helpful and easy to understand and set the expectations. Like, holy crap, we can do it. We can make it easy and digestible. So, yes, I think like those are some of the biggest things. And if you're going to have an unlimited PTO policy, tell us how to use the damn thing. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
like make sure everybody knows how to use it and that you set a path forward that freaking makes sense and that is digestible so that you don't have this fearful, like expression where you're like you don't take time off because you're fearful that you're going to see retaliation because of the way that you went about asking for it or when you decided to take it or for how long it was or where you went or whatever it might be, right? So
yeah. And I think one thing that I find myself very guilty of, and I know that this is something that particularly female business owners and entrepreneurs struggle with, is this idea that I can't take time away. That I There is always something to be done. If and we get into this if then dynamic all the time. Well, if I get this done, then I can do that. And if I do this, then I'll do that. And when this happens, I can take a break. And just it can just be so engrossing. And I think that that is a space where, particularly as women, we can almost, um, it's amazing how bad we can make ourselves feel about things. And time off has somehow in the last few years gotten into that bucket, of like, I just can't take time away from work because everything is a house of cards and it will all come crashing down if I step away for 5 minutes. So, shout out to my ladies out there. If you need a little reality check, you can step away, and it's healthy to do so.
I mean, fundamentally, we need time away. Everybody needs time away. And to not take it you're actually causing yourself a big disservice
Yeah.
and the team itself. Um, so I would agree with like we get into head trash that says, we can't take time away. Heaven forbid we leave and something goes astray.
Yeah.
What if you left and everything went well?
I know. It's like we can't even comprehend what that looks like. Instead, we're just over here like smashing our heads against the wall, being like, oh, and then it just turns into resentment, and then you're mad at everybody, and it just like it
yeah.
gets so out of control so quickly. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
take your
that's
damn
like the
time.
worry. The crazy worry, I think, is something that's natural. It comes naturally to think about the negative elements of this and lead to fear, but like taking time off shouldn't be that way. So
Yeah,
I think
you
we
deserve
can do
it.
that. You deserve it.
Take
Take it.
it.
Take it, damn it. Okay,
Uh,
so onboarding and HR, what is our next subject matter?
yeah. So onboarding beyond HR, and here's what I mean by this.
What?
And this
Wait. There's nothing beyond HR and onboarding. Onboarding begins and stops with HR, right? That's it.
yeah,
I don't know why are we even talking about this?
this is a thing that has long been a tough learning experience for us as we have hired individuals over the last several years, which is, oh my God, yay, they accepted the job. I got my person signed up. And then you're like, shit, how do I get them to do the job that I just hired them for? Because all too often, what happens as hiring managers is that we only think about the needs on the front end, which is great and helpful and useful. But as soon as somebody is, hired and ready to jump in, you need to make sure that there's a job for them to jump into legitimately. And so this is something that has come up a couple times, in the last few weeks, where HR onboarding is literally getting everything that they need to show up and work from a legal standpoint, from a payroll standpoint, all of that. Where there is a responsibility as a hiring manager for onboarding is, how are you going to initiate that individual into the role that you hired them for? So I'm talking about processes and background information and the ecosystems of what you work in. So whether that's, here's all the software programs we use, and here's how things play together. Here's our clients and our customers. You have to think about it just the same way as a hiring manager that you did when you were a new hire, where you should put your hat on and think, how did I learn all of this? Because I did, right? How did I learn all of this? And what would have been more helpful? And I think that's such a critical piece of hiring and retention, that we're missing in the overall onboarding conversation. Kaylee,
Okay.
where do you think traditional onboarding falls short?
Um, damn near everywhere. So I think where it falls short is I think you're right, Whit. I think we look at like the logistics of how to get the
Right.
individual legally and physically set up for work and financially set up for work. Once we get through that and we get them in the door, there's very little consideration of the ramp up time for that person to be effective in their new role, doing their new functions. And so I think the buckets I would say that need to be reconsidered since they are woefully falling short right now is technology. Fundamentally, it's usually the first domino that just fucking sucks when you come through the door as a new employee, right? You might not even get a computer. Like your
Yeah,
computer might not even be there. You are the one setting up the passwords and getting all of the systems ready to rock and roll. How do you get to a file server? What kind of file server are we even using? Like, I mean, there's all of those. It causes so much stress because the IT is not set up, especially in small businesses where your business owners are really doing a lot of the IT heavy lift. One of the things that they can focus on to help alleviate that stress is to do the IT stuff up front. Maybe take 5 days longer to have that person come on board so that you can be better prepared and have all of the IT things set up up front of hand. Other thing is the knowledge base, right? The knowledge of where's all the insight on the company, right? Who do we work with? How do we go about this? Like the knowledge that is passed down between the different groups and individuals on the team that actually allow a person to get up and running and working in their role, where does that live?
right,
Um, we've seen it being using like video. We're going to talk this a little bit later, but like using video applications have been night and day. Tracking what you're going to need that individual to do. So leading up to actually onboarding this person to taking over a function, it's oftentimes really helpful for a hiring manager to sit down and say, here are the activities I need this person to do. And this is the how behind them and the why. If you can put that all into one spot, now, if you're a video person, great, video is your game. If you're a written person, great. Put it all into a binder, whatever it might look like, just as long as that material is handed over, is able to be handed over in some format. That's really what the clue is. So I'd say technology, the knowledge base, and then I would say the third one is relationships. So I think building and helping that individual get to know the people that they're going to be working with within the team and how and when to tap them. If you could take the awkwardness out of that for a new person, like actually taking them to lunch with the different team members that they're going to be working with and laying out the groundwork or introducing them virtually with those individuals and setting the expectations and the groundwork within that introduction, that alleviates stress so well for a new hire. So I think where we're getting it wrong is we're forgetting the relationships are what make things really like jive, right? That gives them, the ability to ask questions and know their orbit of the individuals they're going to be working with, the knowledge, right? The knowledge base of how and when, why we do specific things as an organization or as a team, and then the technology, getting that stuff set up. If you can get those three things accomplished, that's really onboarding, not just the payroll shit. Like, honestly.
yeah. Yeah, I spot on, and I love the bucket approach. I think one thing we see happen often, particularly with small business owners who are hiring from a space of panic, is that the idea is, well, let's just get them in the door. We're just going to get them in the door, which seems great, but oftentimes can be just completely overwhelming. And then it takes a long time for that relationship to bounce back because you're starting at a deficit and you have to earn the trust of the individual, and they are trying to let you do that, but you have to set somebody up for success. And I think doing what Caley mentioned and getting that process dialed ahead of time is a huge advantage. One thing that can be really helpful in this process is to actually, when you are doing the job description and the job postings, is to actually just do a copy of that document and add into it notes on what you need to do in order to train them to be able to do those things. So that's where you could put the activities and the behaviors and what technology is needed and what equipment is needed, what logins are needed. And so by taking the extra time to do that step all the way back at the very beginning, you are not
Mhm.
only creating accountability for yourself as the hiring manager to make sure that all of your ducks are in a row for this new person, but then you're on a timeline and you're setting the stage for them to also understand that this is the expectation from jump. Because
Yeah.
all too often, you get a new hire in the door, you do lunch, bagels, whatever. Everybody says, hey, hi, hello. And then the hiring manager goes back to their office, sits down, and starts doing their job. And there's a new hire sitting there like, well, what am I supposed to do? Or it's, hey, watch these training videos, which, those can be great, but have to be used effectively. So am I missing anything? I just think overall, hiring managers and people who are hiring, whether you're a business owner or whether you're just a hiring manager within a larger organization, like
Mhm.
you have to take responsibility for the initial impression and experience that your hire is going to have. And it's not something that should be a bad thing or a dread sprint for them to get there for the first day.
Yeah.
That you should be stoked on that, and you should be stoked because you should be looking at that job description and saying, okay, I get to hand this off, I get to get this person to do this, and get excited about the fact that you're setting them up for success, and believe that that's what you're doing.
I think so. It also parlays in if you do this work the way Whitney has outlined it, it parlays well into performance management over time. So yes, it seems like a bit tedious on the front end, and it might not happen directly when you do the job description, but it sure as hell should happen before that person's first day. Like
Yeah,
they need to have a very solid understanding of the components that go into making them successful and what your expectations are in these areas. So it's absolutely fair, and unfortunately, it's part of the heavy lift of being a hiring manager for a new role.
yeah,
It just is, but also a great opportunity. I mean, my God, yeah, you're right. Right? Like you get to hand this stuff off. It's beautiful. So the better you do as at handing the baton, the better off they're going to be when they take off and sprint with it. Like,
yeah. I mean, like I can think of a couple situations where I started new jobs and I was so excited to get in there and like get my sleeves rolled up and like get after it, and then to just like one of them, I just got left in a conference room for like 3 hours while it was like, oh, did you fill out your paperwork? And I'm like, yeah, but I'm like here to work. Can I work? And it's not kind, and I think that is ultimately, like, think about how excited the person that you have chosen to be part of your team is to come and work with you. Like,
mhm.
don't be an asshole by not being prepared to help them do that job. Like it just
Yeah.
seems like such a no-brainer. Yet, I know we all get busy. We all think about all the stuff that we have to do all the time, but you know, it's soul crushing to go home on your first day of work and feel like, I don't know, I didn't. It was just a day. I think it's gonna be okay. Like nobody wants that feeling.
No, what
Oh,
exits happen in the first. Can you hear me okay now?
yeah, I think you were going in and out just a bit.
So the highest level of exit probability happens in the first 90 days, often
Yeah,
because of the experience that you have on onboarding being such a disaster. So I
right.
think for those people that you sometimes I hear like from a hiring manager and it's like, "Hey, well the company doesn't have the onboarding set up. Like it's not my fault that onboarding is a total dumpster." Yeah, that might be true. You might not have an organization that has, like, an amazing, like, training program and onboarding that's smooth and beautiful and absolutely just completely easy for an individual to come on board. It doesn't matter. It is still your responsibility to make sure that you have oops, sorry, earthquake, it looks like. Still your responsibility as a hiring manager to make sure that like that person's going to be successful. Like, and that might mean that you have to roll up your sleeves and do some customization on your onboarding. And I think agnostic of whether or not your team or your organization has a formal onboarding, there is still elements that you're going to have to do yourself that need to be customized for the specific person and what you're looking for them in this role. So there's never a time that you can hire somebody and not have an on-ramp that you customize in some fashion. I don't care what kind of out of box thing some software company tells you. It's
Yeah.
not. It's customization
Yeah.
to make it feel real, feel solid, and also create success for you personally. So
Yeah, and one thing I want to piggyback on that too is like this is a skill as a manager. And this is a skill that like you can learn very easily and you can carry this forward in any job that you have. We've worked with, some large, even multinational organizations with thousands of employees. And the thing that we were most adamant about is as a hiring manager, this is your responsibility. Like you are the on ramp into the organization. And like, so that is just to say that no matter the size of the company, learn this skill, learn how to do this effectively. And I know we're kind of getting close on time, but I want to jump real quick on that point to what we've seen that works and what doesn't. We've talked a little bit about what doesn't, so I'm going to put that with the like, hey, check the boxes, give us your payroll information, and show up and hang out until somebody sees you and tells you something to do. One thing that I think, especially now, we have so many awesome tools like and technology um, aspects that we can use to make this process so much easier. So hiring managers today, you want this to be an easy on ramp? Let me tell you, take your job description, head on over to ChatGPT, plop it in, and say something along the lines of, this is my new hire for the first day. What questions do you anticipate them having? Or what information would be useful for them to know in order to accomplish the items in this job description? So utilizing AI is a great idea. Another thing that if you're like, oh my God, AI is scary, which is fine. There's a lot of people in that boat right now. Do that same exercise for yourself, right? Okay, here's what I need them to do. What do they need in order to do that well? And keep drilling down on those questions. So what do they need? How can they do it? What does access look like? What is the context that they need in order to do it? Where can they find the information that they need? Think about all of those things. And then one other thing, Kaylee, did you want to jump in real quick?
oh no, I think you're on a roll. Keep
Oh,
going, man.
right. One other thing, and I'm like hot on this because we've been using Loom for years as a way to train people on systems and what we're doing. And it just blows my mind that there are still people who aren't doing this. So here's the deal. When you're thinking, if you are hiring somebody who is going to be taking things that you normally do today off your plate, there is absolutely no reason to continue to retrain that person over and over and over and over again. Simply go to Loom or get some sort of, there's so many free screen recorders and record yourself doing the tasks that you want that individual to do. This is far more effective than sending them to any sort of existing training documentation on the software or the platform or anything like that, because it shows how you want it done specifically. And then talk through what you're doing, why you're doing it, and any little quirky things, oh, do you have to hit shift and enter so that this box goes like this without submitting? Like, walk through all of that. And those are going to be awesome things that can live on in perpetuity so that even if you're training somebody in 3 years, you can still point back to those same videos, and you're not answering the same questions over and over again, and you're not overwhelming the person because they can watch those at their own pace. They can
Hmm.
go back and reference them. So I cannot stress that enough.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that is the key, right? Getting the information that these individuals need to be successful in a format that's digestible and easy for them to walk through. And like they might run into that question multiple times. It behooves you to put that together so that you're not getting that request 4 times. And
Yeah,
instead, they can look at the resource 4 times and save you those 3 other additional times that you didn't need to walk them through it again.
yeah,
So I think as much as you can to make it self guided or self led, um, the better off you're going to be. I do have to say, I kind of been turned completely off of like formal training programs with like software where it's like, hey, please watch the Outlook how to videos, and there's 25 hours of Outlook. I
yeah,
think it's far better to do the route that you're suggesting, Whitney, where it's based off of each task. So each one of those tasks that we identified that the individual needs to perform on, it needs to be task oriented rather than systems oriented. And I think that's what
right.
we get wrong in the training functions with new hires is we send them down the rabbit hole on the entirety of the system when their piece of the puzzle that they might be using that system for is very narrow. And so we could have started with the narrow and expanded upon it. Instead, we're trying to go with everything and consolidate it down to like their 3 functions that they need.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's a very simple thing. It's like top line, so give them the context and all of that, and then it's top line, then triage what they need to know, and then triage their tasks and do training based on those elements. Yeah.
Yep, I think so. I think, and the cool thing about that is that that helps build rapport.
Oh yeah.
And without having the individualized elements of that, it's really hard to build rapport. It's hard to build rapport when you're sitting in a room just looking at traditional training videos that are not really geared towards you. Think about like that, at least for me, it was like that biology class in college where you were one of like 80 people in a room and you had to listen to the biology lecture because it was a required class, but you were never going to use the biology elements. That's kinda how those big training programs feel. Like, they're just not in sync with how people actually need to learn to work in a role.
Yeah. And again, it comes back to also being super helpful when it comes down to performance management. Because if the expectation is in those videos on how you want things to be done, you can always point back to that and say, hey, reference this. This is what I'm talking about. So it becomes a vehicle for you to do ongoing coaching as well. So I think that's another key aspect of utilizing those types of tools in this process.
Okay, I have one last question, Whit, and then we can close
Okay.
out. So what happens if I'm an individual that just started at a new role and their onboarding sucks? Help. What do I do? Like, I think I like this job. I think I love it. How do I navigate the fact that they don't have a hiring manager that's pre-set up and ready to rock and roll and onboard me, or a corporate level program that's already established on this?
Yeah, I mean, this is a little tricky. I hadn't really thought about this before. But I think, you know, being proactive is a huge piece of that. Going to your manager and saying, right from jump, hey, I would love to know what I'm accountable for this week or today, and say, can we take a minute and come up with a game plan for what I should be learning, doing, practicing, all of those things, because you're basically going to be building that on ramp for yourself as you join a company. And so basically everything that we've talked about in terms of, training and um, giving context and all of that, you just need to be the one who is facilitating that, asking the good questions. Hey, who's in our ecosystem? What are our clients look like? What tools tools do we use and why? So I think really just kind of reversing the process um, is where I would start.
Yeah. I would agree. Like start with bite size. Like, what do I need to get done this week? What do I need to get done next week? Who do I need to talk to? What technology do I need to have up and running? Like, do you have resources that have done this before? Would you mind walking me through? If you have a really time constrained hiring manager, putting together a very specific and practical hit list when you are in those conversations with them can be really helpful. And sending it to them in advance is
Yeah,
oftentimes really helpful. So, like, if you only get to tap, an hour worth of their time per day, make sure that it's the most effective hour that you possibly can. And you can, kind of outline an agenda that allows you guys to work through those core elements so that way you can be effective in your solo time after that. So I think,
yeah,
you can't always wish that the company has everything set up for you. It might not be real. You might have to learn to onboard yourself into the organization. And in a way, you should be doing it every single time. Even if there is a formal training program or a formal hiring onboarding process with that hiring manager, you still need to be able to close that gap between like what's expected of you and where you are on the very front end.
yeah. And
Yep.
it shows such a huge amount of initiative that is so helpful. I mean, I can't tell you the first young man I ever hired. I thought I did a really good job of doing some onboarding and some training and stuff. And um, he came back with the same questions over and over again, and that's really when it became apparent that like you have to um, you have to work through this on an individual basis, but it's a skill, that can be learned, and it's not taught. Like when people tell somebody, "Hey, you're a manager now, go hire this person," they're not like, "And here's some insight into that world." Normally, it's just like, "Okay, cool, like great, I guess I'll go figure it out." So understanding that there is that element of Rubik's cubing on both sides is, I think, very, very helpful. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
And that's part of the reason why you and I are so excited about our Hire Better new program that we're launching. It'll be interesting to give better resources to make sure that everybody hires more effectively. And part of the hiring process is, kind of plays into like the onboarding, like we were saying, like it starts really from the jump. So
yeah,
um,
I agree. And
hopefully we'll
I'll
all get
drop
better.
what?
Is that hopefully it'll help everybody get better at hiring.
Yeah. And I'll drop some links into the captions and stuff with some of our favorite tools for streamlining some of the training processes. I think that could be super helpful. But yeah, force be with you, man. It's always an interesting thing. So, thank you for your time and for tuning in. And as usual, give us a follow on the socials. And you can subscribe to our newsletter and our YouTube channel. We're like all over the interwebs these days. Yeah, we'll see you next week.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
I couldn't find the button. I got it now.